Episode 136, Real Connection Through Vulnerability with Meagan Skidmore.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
We all yearn and are wired to be connected to those around us. So how do we do it? How do we become more connected to those in our lives? Coach Meagan Skidmore feels the key to connection is the ability and willingness to be vulnerable. On today's podcast, she shares great examples and insights on how to be more vulnerable and what connection can look like when we are. If you feel like there is a relationship in your life that could use better connection, look at how vulnerable you are willing to be and then see if you can practice vulnerability more. The research shows you will almost always achieve your goal of greater connection. This is a great episode for all of us to learn from, so we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the podcast today. I am joined by Coach Meagan Skidmore. Hey, Meagan.
Hi, Heather. I am so happy to be back on again with you.
I am so happy to have you. Thanks for being here. Fun little fact, Meagan also has a podcast, and I got to be a guest on her podcast just a couple of days ago. So we are just chit-chatting all week long.
Almost besties now.
Yes, we are. All right. Well, Meagan, like she mentioned, has been on before, and I am going to have her introduce herself because many of you maybe did not listen or did not hear that first episode. If not, we will link to it in the show notes so you can hear it. But anyway, Meagan, will you give us an introduction here?
I would love to. So I'm Meagan Skidmore, as Heather said. I live in Dallas, Texas. We have been here for almost 20 years, quite yet, almost. So only home our two kiddos really know. My youngest is about to graduate from high school. My oldest is in school for fashion design, currently on gap year. So I get them both at home right now, which I love. My husband is an attorney for a Texas-based firm, and that's what brought us here almost 20 years ago. I studied school counseling psychology many moons ago at Brigham Young University. So I have been drawn to this helping space for a very, very long time. And once it was the pandemic, when the pandemic hit and I just had all these hours upon hours, I thought maybe I should go back and get a second master's, basically, because mine was so outdated. But then I found coaching, and I will always remember that moment when I found the Life Coach School link on Jody Moore's website. And I just was a sponge, and I just watched video after video, and I was hooked. I knew this was for me. And it's been such a fantastic space to be a part of and to occupy and to experience immense personal growth and be able to hold the hands, proverbially speaking, of my clients as they progress and grow and develop. It's a beautiful space.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you for telling us a little bit about you. I think that I often ponder on the reality that the person who has benefited most from me doing this work is myself. Of course, I have clients that I talk with and things that I teach, and I am the one that has been forever changed. And
amen, sister.
Yep. Good stuff.
So I went on such a walk down memory lane. I failed to mention my niche as a coach, and that is I work with LGBTQ plus families of a conservative faith background who feel their world has turned upside down. It can be a difficult intersection as they try to reconcile things that they have been taught and learned throughout their lives and now the lived experience of their own beloved child, and how often there's a lot of cognitive dissonance trying to make sense of all of that. And so I offer support to both parents and the teens or young adults of the families. It just kind of a case by case basis.
I think the word reconcile was a perfect word to use there, because that is so much what we have to do in any area of our life where we are feeling this cognitive dissonance, like you said. Like, we have to just be able to reconcile within our minds all the things, and coaching for sure is so good at helping reconcile things.
My goodness, yes. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Meagan, what are we going to talk about today?
Oh my goodness, all the things. I reached out because I wanted to be on the podcast again, because this theme of connection this thread has just been weaving through my brain for, I don't know, since the last thing that was weaving before in my brain. It's just so important in our family lives, but also in the other spaces which we occupy in our communities, whether that's civic or faith or extended family. Not everybody lives near their families. And so I almost see that as an additional space that we occupy. I don't see my family like maybe a few times a year, if that. So I just think it's so important. And I was glad that you all were on board for this topic today.
I love it. The thing that is so intriguing about connection, it's a very nice sounding word, right? We all want connection, or we think we do, because when it gets right down to it, having connection, like true connection with people, requires some uncomfortableness. It requires us to let them be them, even though it's not necessarily, like, we might not agree with all the things.
Yes.
And so though we say it and it sounds fine and dandy, we also have to realize that when we want connection, we're also agreeing that we want it to be maybe even a little bit messy. Like, it might be a little bit messy to have connection, and that's okay.
Yes. And leaning into that, it's okay. It doesn't have to be a problem. I've been reading some Brene Brown lately. I think we all just kind of read that, kind of like, you pull out scriptures, you pull out Brene Brown.
I know. I should show you. Actually, my Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart is like, I mean, if any of you guys are watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, you won't
I think
see
that's
it.
a coach's Bible or a therapist's Bible or something.
But it is sitting next to my scripture, because if there is an emotion that is mentioned in the scripture and I pull it up and look it up in Atlas of the Heart, it gives me some fantastic insight as to what that means.
So I have been reading in Daring Greatly, and this is what Brene Brown said about connection. She said, connection is why we're here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and without it, there is suffering. So here's an interesting thing. I was talking with a coach not too long ago, a parenting coach, and we were having a discussion. And this is what came up. Our role as parents is not to make sure certain things happen or to force a certain path or outcome for our children. And actually, it's not even to make sure that they are fulfilled and happy and successful and all of those things. Actually, we're making it about ourselves, if that's where our focus is. Our role is to cultivate a space where our children can feel comfortable to discover who they are and to be themselves along the way without fear of repercussions or rejection or without fear, period, as much as we're humanly able to create that space. And I believe we cultivate that space through connection. If our kids we can even extend it to our loved ones, don't feel connected to us, chances are they're not going to feel safe in our presence. They're not going to feel safe opening up. And I believe that's why this is even an important conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, safety, like you said, is the key to really any sort of connection. You have to feel safe in order to feel like you can connect with people, to put yourself out there to connect. So what are some ways that as parents, we can create an environment of connection with our children?
It's a really great question. And so I want to preface that with some insight that Brene shared as part of her research. Okay. During her research, she asked participants to share about their most important relationships and experiences of connection. And what she found was that her participants were talking about things like heartbreak and betrayal and shame. Basically, the fear of not being worthy of real connection. And incidentally, little side note, that's where her shame work was birthed from. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about connection. And so through her research, okay, that informs us that there's a likelihood that our own kids have this fear of not being worthy of real connection. So in order to connect, first, we must be willing to take risks, to take chances, to be vulnerable. We must be okay with the possibility that we're going to experience negative emotions or feelings, along with positive ones, possibly, that we're going to be, like you mentioned earlier, uncomfortable, along with maybe more comfortable feelings or pleasant, we could say. And truly, it is courageous to face that fear of not being worthy of real connection that ultimately will bring that desired, coveted connection. It's kind of paradoxical. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I didn't go in too many figure eights there.
Oh, I'm the queen of figure eights. So
okay, good. You can do the pretzel, you can do all that. So where do we start? Being vulnerable, right here. Yeah. We lead the way. We model it ourselves. We lean into that vulnerability.
Yeah, it makes me think of a time my husband and I were having a conversation with one of our kids, and I could tell they were resistant to talk to us about something. And rather than dig, I decided to share something that was kind of scary for me, like something that I'd been working on that I felt a little rejected on. And my husband actually shared something that he'd been working on that was kind of big in his life. And he didn't typically share stuff like that mm-hmm. with our children. Mm-hmm. But after we both kind of talked a little bit, this child opened up in a way to us that has not happened before. And I really think, looking back on it, and even immediately I recognize this wouldn't have happened had we not both been willing to share things here that we don't typically share.
Bingo. Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the key. And that is just kind of the catch-22, if you want to call it that. If you want someone else, or if you're hoping for vulnerability from someone else, more often than not, we need to be the ones to mm-hmm. lead the way. We have to be the ones, essentially, to let go of that control that we want and be willing to feel whatever comes up in that process of showing up vulnerably. In Atlas of the Heart, I looked this up, Brene defines vulnerability as the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. I think the emotional exposure part is the one that we have the hardest time with. But I so think it's worth it to stretch ourselves, to take that leap, to do what you and your spouse did, because I think there's too much at stake when we hide our true selves. In many ways, I think we're living half a life, or at the minimum, an inauthentic life. And think about how much, just by simply sharing, you and your spouse, sharing with your child, I mean, you can't make that up. You can't force something like that. You can't even go back and try to recreate it. The gift is in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully, with time, other things will come up. Then they're going to feel, because they know they connected, that they were safe previously, then they're going to be more likely to try that again. And maybe they'll be the ones to initiate it the next time.
Side note here, it's interesting that as you talk about Brene Brown, and you've been quoting her some of the time, your voice sounds similar to hers for me. So it's very easy for me to actually hear Brene saying these things, because your voices sound very similar.
It is my dream to meet her in person. I mean, she does just live in Austin.
I was going to say, she lives in Texas, doesn't she? But Texas is big, so.
It is. Maybe one day.
Okay, so vulnerability, we know, is very important here. How can we cultivate this? It's not necessarily an attitude of vulnerability, but just cultivate the courage to be vulnerable. How do we do that?
Yeah, that's really good. That's great. I think practice, just doing it, just jumping in and trying in all of our lovely human messiness and discomfort. Discomfort doesn't have to be a problem. Messiness doesn't have to be a problem. We can actually see it and just love it, and see that as a beautiful part of our existence. I actually made my word of the year discomfortable, because I created one from two.
Perfect.
Because that was my attempt at trying to just normalize, just be comfortable with discomfort. Just get used to it. It's not a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem. And it describes so much of, how it feels to lean into things in life. So in my attempts to normalize all of that, it's my mantra for this year. And we've already talked some about showing up vulnerably, being discomfortable at home, and strive to create that connection with our close family members and even loved ones and friends. I think another really important place that we can put this into practice, and I'm going to emphasize the word practice, because it's not something that I'm going to say is the norm. It's not something that maybe we see more than we do not see it, but that is to show up vulnerably in our faith communities, whether that's one-on-one, perhaps in a group setting like a class or a study group, or in our volunteer service in church. And that can look like a lot of different things. Where I live, there's a lot of different conservative Christian faiths. And so there's ministries, there's teaching service, there's feeding, clothing those with less, and so on. There's lots of ways where that service can show up. So striving to create connection in those settings is a great place to start practicing that vulnerability. And it doesn't even have to be in the physical church building, right? As a matter of fact, I think sometimes it's as meaningful or more so if it's not. When I say a faith community, the communing can be in someone's home. It can be taking a walk together or chatting over lunch. So from the beginning of this coaching journey, I remember when I was doing the certification part in our CCP, what does that stand for? Coach Certification Program. I remember making a conscious decision that I was going to make efforts to be more vulnerable and show up authentically in the things that I did and I said, whether that was in class or whether that was in the social media account that I created specifically for my coaching business. And that was a choice I had to make. And it wasn't easy. I remember in the beginning days making posts that later on I realized were incorrect. I'd gotten the concept mixed up. And I even ran it by my classmates and I'm like, oh, I totally got that concept backwards, didn't I? Should I take it down? Should I delete it? Does that make me look, like I'm not a true coach? And in the end, I've left everything up because I decided that's part of me showing up vulnerably and authentically. That's who I am as a human. I'm not perfect and I'm going to get things mixed up. Oh, well, okay, next. It doesn't mean I'm 100% for me as I'm working towards it each day.
Yeah.
And I believe part of being authentic is allowing yourself to be and feel vulnerable and to show up as a person who is okay with vulnerability. If that's not your truth, being willing to be vulnerable is a start. It's a skill that can be cultivated. And I really believe it's just in the doing of it, the practicing of it. It is a skill that can be cultivated. And each time you feel a little less discomfort, you feel a little less resistant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I know that I have experienced that just personally in my life. And it doesn't mean, I don't know that that feeling of discomfort or like anxiousness in sharing something, for me, it has not gone away. I've just gotten better at handling the discomfort of it.
Yes, I wanted to mention this too. So I took a class, and I've heard more than one coach share this concept, but I happened to hear it from Bev. She was my CCP instructor, but also I took her bar-free business building personality course. But here is a great way to think about it. You do want to be aware of your nervous system. Anytime you're pushing yourself outside of what is comfortable to you, you do need to be aware of how far you're pushing yourself. So imagine it this way. There's 3 zones. Your inner zone, your inner circle, that's your zone of comfort. That's where we all like to live and we all like to reside. That's where all the fuzzy, warm blankets are, and endless hot chocolate and donuts and all those things. That's your inner circle. The circle right outside of that, your next zone, is your zone of discomfort. That's where you can push your limits a little or a lot, staying in tune with yourself. You try something new while simultaneously feeling scared or nervous or uneasy, whatever. An example is my very first podcast interview that I did was with Tina Gosney.
Mm-hmm.
I prepared ahead of time. I practiced it. I wrote it out. To the extent that you can write an interview out.
Right.
I felt all of the feelings and I did it anyway. And every time I've done an interview, you kind of go through that same thing, but I certainly don't feel today doing this interview the same things that I felt, a year and a half ago. So that third circle, you've got your inner, which is your zone of comfort. The next is your zone of discomfort. Your last zone, the outer zone, is your zone of panic. That's when you feel unsafe, you shut down. You basically end in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You do not want to operate from this zone. There's not growth in the zone of panic. What happens is you have a dysregulated nervous system. And sometimes it just happens. You don't mean to go there, but you do. You start to learn the signs and the signals from your body, and that need to be honored. And that is something that comes in the practice part, the skill, the learned skill. You learn to start to recognize those things. And once you are able to do that, then you get to a point where you can choose when and where and with whom you are going to be vulnerable. And along the way, this is why you hire a coach to help you as you're navigating, as you're practicing, as you're trying all these new things. And your coach can help you see the things that you might be a little blind to, the awareness piece, the feelings that you're actually feeling. you've probably experienced this. It's amazing as a coach how many people have a hard time expressing what they're feeling outside of kind of the 4 or 5 traditional happy, mad, sad, angry, glad.
Mm-hmm.
Not that those are bad descriptions, but usually there's a little more to it
Yeah.
than
Yeah, I
that.
think they're a good starting point, right? Like if people
They
identify
are.
it as being happy, then I'm like, okay, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's pull off some of those layers and see what's really below the happy. But um, I think another thing, and this is from Brene Brown as well, is she said that people in your life have to earn the right for you to choose to be vulnerable with them. It's not like we're saying
Yes.
just go around and share your soul with all the
Yes.
people. I mean, sure, that happens on social media, whether if that's the kind of way that you like to share, but like we're talking specific people here who you feel you want to have that
Yes.
sort of connection with, the people that have earned the right. Sometimes I'm not sure that we think our children have earned the right for us to be vulnerable with them, but we are actually choosing to be vulnerable with them on purpose because we want them to, we're guiding them and helping them
Yes.
do that
And I think
themselves.
we can overlook we can absorb it with our love to a degree.
Mhm. Yeah,
I agree.
I just think that that's a good thing to remember, that we can also choose who
It
we.
absolutely is. And, as parents, that brings another concept to mind. When we are going through this process, our kids can tell if there's an agenda. And really, there should be no other agenda than just love and connection. Right.
Yeah.
And you were talking about those that maybe share in a more public arena, like social media, more frequently. And that is more aligned probably with who they are on the inside. And that's, and they know their nervous system, and to them, it doesn't send them into a zone of panic. Right.
Right.
But bringing it back to the more personal level, like what you were talking about in your close family, friend, loved one relationships, they will eventually feel if you're hoping for a certain thing by being open or vulnerable with them.
Yeah.
And that will not have the desired outcome.
Yeah.
However, if you can stick to keeping an open-ended possible outcome and just loving along the way, at the very minimum, I believe your trust will be increased. That love will be increased, and then ultimately connection.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So here's another question.
Yeah.
What about those parents who feel like they have cultivated an environment of connection, who feel like they have done those things where they've created some safety and their children don't feel like that was the case?
Yeah.
What then?
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
That's a valid concern and question, because as parents, I think we're always operating from this space of, this is what I know to do. This is what makes sense, or this is what was taught to me, or how my parents or caregivers, did it for me. And I think they truly come from a place of well intentions. So in answer to your question, this seems to me like an opportunity to learn. Our children can truly be our greatest teachers. Just because you feel a certain outcome was achieved or should have been achieved, like let's say in a discussion or in a sharing moment like you and your spouse had with your child. And that's ultimately what our relationships are made of, right? A whole lot of individual moments like that added up. So just because we feel a certain outcome was achieved doesn't mean it was experienced in the same way by the other person. So that is an invitation to listen, to find a neutral space in your heart and in your mind, and not just hear their voice in an audible way, but to hear with what they're expressing with your heart and with your soul. Avoid the temptation or the urge to fill in blanks or to finish their sentences, thinking that you know your child better than they do. Just avoid that temptation. And again, I didn't mean for this to be such a plug for hiring a coach, but this is where, if you're not sure whether, you're doing it, I don't want to say right, or whether you're doing this or not, whether you are assuming a certain outcome versus, your child has experienced something else. This is where I can help. This is where you can help. This is where hiring a coach is so helpful, because your child is not responsible for your personal growth. You are. And that is where having a personal life coach can help, because let's be honest, it is not easy to come face to face with these realizations. I get it. I've been there. It's humbling. It's hard. It takes energy. However, it's necessary, and the payoff is huge.
Yeah.
It's immeasurable.
So true.
So go to the LDS Life Coach directory and find you a coach.
Oh, you're awesome, Meagan. Thank you. Okay, so a couple more things.
Okay.
We're gonna bring it back to the queen of emotions here. Brene Brown
Yeah.
talks a lot about shame. I just want to expand upon that a little bit, like the role of shame in the whole idea of vulnerability.
Yeah. So that's a really important one to take into consideration. And I think where that comes into consideration is when we're asking, where do these messy feelings come from? Where are these viewpoints, these thoughts that I'm having about fill in the blank, whatever subject matter you're talking about? In my case, it's often the LGBTQ plus community and the policies and whatnot surrounding that particular community. So it's important to know, where do these messy feelings, viewpoints, thoughts about fill in your subject we are considering being vulnerable about, where is it coming from? And I'd say it's from shame. The definition, shame is ultimately, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I am not worthy enough. I don't inherently fit. I'm not lovable, which is a lie, right? We think or see or feel it as something inherently wrong, as though it defines us rather than us being separate from us, right? In other words, whatever thing I'm sharing about means, shame tells us it means it is me. I am fear. I am rejection. I am fill in the blank. I'm going to share an experience. I was extended a calling at the end of last year to be a teacher in Relief Society. My journey as an LGBTQ plus parent has changed me, in my opinion, for the better. I've been stretched and I've experienced major spiritual growth. My mind, my heart, my vision has expanded. As I mentioned earlier, I made a commitment to show up authentically in this journey as a coach. So I knew in order to accept this calling, I needed to bring all of me to the table. All my messy, authentic self. Meagan before 2019 was a different Meagan that is, here today. And I expressed this to my Relief Study president. I explained I would bring all of me and my experiences as a Q plus mama that have molded, shaped, changed, refined me. And that I wasn't going to be one of those teachers that just reads out of the manual and passes out papers and, regurgitate material, that I would share and emote and ask for that in return, at least open it up to others to share. So for me, my fears here were, look, I just laid this all out on the table. My fears were of being rejected, right? Or being told no, that it was not okay or not acceptable to approach my calling service in this way. But I knew I needed to be integrity with myself. And I'm so glad I was, because she was very receptive. And she responded, actually, that's exactly what we want and need. We want someone who will just basically facilitate open, helpful discussion, give others the opportunity to share. So that, I did not know what the outcome would be. I had zero idea what the outcome would be, but it was a win-win. And I was really glad that I was open, vulnerable, and I claimed my truth. And why is this important? If we could get past that, the self-judgment, the self-rejection that comes from our thoughts and opinions based in shame, then maybe, just maybe, we can start to show up authentically in our faith communities, in our homes, in our civic communities, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to add an extra why this is important. It's important particularly as there are some, including our children, families, loved ones, friends, neighbors, etc., that are experiencing what they might call a faith crisis or a faith transition or a pivot in their faith journey or a faith expansion. That's what I call mine. And if they do not feel that they can be vulnerable or that others will also reciprocate or at least listen at the very least, not only will they not feel safe to share, but there's going to be zero connection going on. And if that's not happening, they are going to try to find it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel strongly about, we do have, I think part of our covenant to mourn with those who mourn and to bear one another's burden is be a part of creating those spaces that make it possible to do that.
And like you said, it starts with us, right? It starts with us being
Yes.
willing to do that, to share us, to be us, and to let other people be them and listen without judgment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So as we wrap it up here,
Yeah.
I can't help but think that there is great parallel in how all of this translates into our relationship with our heavenly parents. That there's just so much that can be learned here as we also strive to have a relationship, a deeper connection with them.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, excellent thought to consider. I really believe that not only does serving authentically and showing up as our real selves contribute to connection, it fosters spiritual progression. It helps cultivate Christ-like empathy and helps to create safe spaces in our faith communities where the Spirit of Christ can dwell in abundance. And remember, when I say faith-based communities, you can commune in or outside of the physical building, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about Christ. He never pretended or hid who he was. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He was direct, he was forthright, he was honest, didn't mince words. I think about his examples of vulnerability. He asked for help from his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, how many of us struggle to ask for help? And not only did he ask once, but he asked twice in the middle of the night again. I mean, and he had to wake him up. I mean, that's vulnerable. Like, I need your help. What would that have been like? I can't even imagine. To me, it seems courageous that he called Peter out, not by name, but by saying, before the cock has crowed 3 times, one of you among us will have denied me thrice. He was being courageous. He was being direct. He was being open.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Enos. A large part of his story is just focused on someone making themselves vulnerable to a higher power or God, opening up their heart, sharing their biggest fears, worries, and so on, and admitting their very humanness to this divine being that they called God, right? There's other examples that I have written here, but I know we're short on time. There are many examples of those who have gone before us, being vulnerable, putting themselves out there, not knowing beforehand the outcome. Now it's our turn for ourselves and our families. And when I say family, I don't mean just blood relation, neighborhood family, community family, our congregations. Now it's our turn to add our links to this long chain of vulnerability, a figurative connection of our spirits through love, the greatest power.
Oh, Meagan, thank you so much. That was a great way to wrap it up. I love this space, and I say this all the time, where we can bring our profession and our religious beliefs into one place. And I think you did that
Amen.
really, really beautifully.
Amen.
So Before we go, can you share with people where they can find
Yeah.
you?
The easiest is probably my website, just meaganskidmorecoaching.com. You just have to make sure and spell Meagan correctly. MEAGAN, Skidmore Coaching, all one word.com.
Okay.
You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook. I check my DMs and I will respond to you. I've even had young adults call me on Instagram wanting some help and guidance. I didn't know that was a thing that you could call through Instagram.
It never ceases to amaze me what the thing is. So
I'm just, you know what? I'm here for you. However you
yeah,
want to figure out to
I
contact me.
know.
I am here for you.
Oh, that's awesome. And you have proven that really in every interaction that I've had with you, that you are just there for people. So thank you. We'll link to all those things in the show notes.
Yeah,
Thank you for being with me today and
absolutely.
this great conversation. It's
Such a
been a real
joy.
treat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love you, friend. Love being
Well,
here.
love you too. Thanks everybody for being here. And we hope you will share this with those that you love and that you'll join us again next time. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.